On first down, they hand off to Marlon Mack. Huge hole, 50-yard line. He's at the 40, still going near sideline. He's at the 10. He's at the 5, and he will score. Touchdown, Marlon Mack. Touchdown, I-N-D-Y. And again, it's picked off. It's Darius Leonard. Leonard with a second INT, and he's streaking down the near sideline. He's at the 40. He's at the 30. He's at the 20. He's going to go. A pick six for the Maniac. Kenny Moore gets to Deshaun Watson. That's a sack for Kenny Moore. Kenny has a pick and now a sack in the game.
Horseshoe is back, baby. The horseshoe is back.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Bring the Juice podcast. I am your host, Cody Felger. Joining me, special guest, friend of the show, from the Fan, Kevin Bowen. Kevin, how are you doing, man?
Doing good, Cody. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, hanging in there during this time. I feel like the next couple of months will be a little bit slower in the NFL circles, but at least we'll get a schedule release later in the week and have some more fresh news items to talk about here in May.
Yeah, absolutely. And just mentioning, the NFL draft just happened a little over a week ago now, and the Indianapolis Colts, throughout this offseason, they've addressed something that I want to talk about, especially, free agency and the draft. So Frank Reich at the beginning of the 2019 season, when asked about what some of his goals were, said he wanted to be a top 5 rushing offense. He wanted the Colts to be a top 5 rushing offense. Well, the Colts didn't meet that mark in 2019. They were very good at the running game, but they actually were top 7. They were number 7th in the league in the rushing attack. And so Colts did a number of things this offseason to double, even triple down on kind of that whole idea of wanting to be a top 5 rushing team. They signed Roosevelt Nix. They signed Trey Burton, who's actually a pretty good blocking tight end. And then they draft Jonathan Taylor in the second round. So, Kevin, what are some of these moves, amongst others, kind of telling you about Frank Reich wanting to establish a run and be a top 5 rushing attack in the league?
Yeah, I mean, they are very bullish on this. And I think for how much success the Colts had last year from a rushing offense standpoint, there were still moments, some very critical moments in the season, and when that bread and butter just wasn't there on a week in, week out basis. And it's high expectations and it's very difficult to achieve that. But they just weren't able to do that over the course of a 16-game season. And ultimately, when your passing game struggles as much as it did, it's going to cost you an appearance, whether that's competing for a wild card spot in week 16 or 17, or obviously competing for a division title. And, it's something I've mentioned several times in my podcast of, I would consider the Colts rushing attack really good, but not elite. And I mean that because when you look at the top 10 rushing defenses the Colts faced last season, they were right around 3 yards per carry in those 3 meetings against Tampa Bay, New Orleans, and Oakland. And then you look at what a team like Tennessee obviously did in the playoffs. I mean, that is an elite rushing attack. That's over 5 yards per carry against, Baltimore and New England, 2 of the best run defenses in the entire NFL. So, I think the Colts that know, that they still had another kind of step to take with that. And obviously the Jonathan Taylor pick being the biggest one. But as you mentioned, Roosevelt Nix, comes in and gives your offense a different dimension. Trey Burton is more of a blocking presence than Eric Ebron. I am a little bit surprised the offensive line didn't get more attention. But still, there were some very notable moves that the Colts are going to, no matter who's under center, Jacoby Brissett, Andrew Luck, Phillip Rivers, they want to be a team that can run the football and dictate when they want to run the football. It's something that they couldn't do consistently enough last season.
And mentioning Jonathan Taylor, what new element amongst many do you think the drafting of Jonathan Taylor does for your rushing offense?
Yeah, I think it's a big playability more than anything. It's funny. I watch Jonathan Taylor a lot at Wisconsin, and I guess I just kind of, I don't know, maybe assumed or watching a few plays. Maybe I was just like, oh, this is a guy that mainly relies on that, 225, 230 pound frame. But when you watch him more, and I've certainly done that over the last week and a half, I mean, his home run ability just separates him from not only the opposing defense, but I think separates him from even past Wisconsin running backs. You look at Monte Balls, a second-round pick. You look at Melvin Gordon as a first-round pick. I mean, those guys did not run, 4.39 in the 40-yard dash. They were 4.5, 4.6 guys and just didn't have that explosive playmaking element that I think Taylor brings. He's not just, 3 yards in a cloud of dust, just wearing you down in the fourth quarter. Eventually those numbers just start to pile up. Look at how many 200-yard games he had in college, Iowa and Ohio State and Michigan. I mean, those were some big runs that he had in those games. So I think all of that, stands out to me. And I just feel like he now gives you some of the big playability that, Marlon Mack has hit on several huge runs in his career, but now you have an added dimension to where no matter who's in the game at running back, you have that home run element.
Yeah, and then, staying with these running backs, how do you think this helps Marlon Mack? Because we've seen Marlon Mack ever since he got drafted by the Colts in 2017. He hasn't played in the full 16-game season. So there have been some durability concerns along with him and Malik Hooker, who the Colts just declined his option. How do you think this helps Marlon Mack? I know some people are like, well, this means Marlon Mack might get traded, or this means Marlon Mack's not going to get the same production. I actually kind of look at it, Kevin, as a positive for Marlon Mack, because now, Frank Reich has historically used a multi-back system where, he may have a feature back, but there's multiple guys getting the ball and it keeps guys fresh. I guess I'm curious from your perspective, how do you think this is actually a positive for Marlon Mack?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a positive when you look at his longevity, and just like you said, having a little bit more tread on those tires coming out of this 2020 season, because he's not going to need to carry the same sort of workload that he's had for the past two seasons, ever since Frank Gore moved on in 2017 and Mack emerged as that lead back. So that will help him down the road. But outside of that, I mean, he's not going to be getting the lion's share. So I think selfishly, Mack would maybe want more of that lead back role. And in a critical, fourth quarter series, I'll be very interested to see who the Colts turn to, whether that be Jonathan Taylor or it be Marlon Mack. And this just goes back to, some of the arguments that I'm sure we'll have come March about the free agency outlook and the future outlook for Marlon Mack. I just cannot see him coming back here, because you only got one chance to make that money as a running back in the NFL. That's how present day running backs, go about things. The Frank Gore is beyond the anomaly in what he's able to do throughout his entire career. So I just think Mack will want the opportunity to be a lead back somewhere else. You don't draft a guy 41st overall to split carries. I mean, Jonathan Taylor needs to become a 20 carry guy for you at some point in his career. But yeah, for this season, again, from more of a 12 carry standpoint, 15 carry standpoint, I'll be really curious to see exactly what that looks like, because, Marlon Mack isn't, or I guess under Frank Reich, we haven't really seen a by committee approach. Marlon Mack has had a lot of 20 carry plus games in his career. Yes, we saw some of that in Philly. Granted, Frank Reich wasn't the play caller then. So I will be interested to see how all that develops for the Colts this season.
What do you think this means for the future of Jordan Wilkins with the Colts?
That's a great question. I actually have him off my 53-man roster that I predicted last week. And I know it's very, very early, but the reason that I go off that is not so much for what I think of Jordan Wilkins. I think Jordan Wilkins has been pretty effective when he's been in the game. It just goes back to how the Colts used Jonathan Williams last season, or even the season before that. I mean, you talk about a fourth running back, because obviously you have Taylor, you have Mack, you have Nyheim Hines, and then that fourth running back. There were so many times when Jonathan Williams was a healthy scratch, wouldn't even play, wouldn't even dress. Even when he had the back-to-back 100-yard games, when Marlon Mack came back, I want to say Williams had like 2 carries in the final month of the season. So even when he proved himself, it's not like that led to any sort of role. So for Jordan Wilkins to make this team, he's going to have to be a core special team player without a doubt. He's played special teams, which is good news, but he's going to have to be that without question. And then you throw in Roosevelt Jones. I mean, that's kind of an extra roster spot that you have to think about as well when you start crunching numbers. We know. Excuse me, Roosevelt Jones. I'm thinking of the Butler basketball player, Roosevelt Nix. he is a big time special teams presence as well. And Frank Reich has mentioned that. So I think that's where you get into the difficulty of things with Wilkins of like, okay, do you have the luxury of keeping a third quarterback, a fourth running back? That it just gets into some of the number issues. You do get the extra 2 roster spots each week. So maybe, you're able to bump someone up off the practice squad. But I just don't think it's a slam dunk for Jordan Wilkins to make this team, let alone have a role on game days.
Yeah, and kind of speaking on Nyheim Hines, what do you think the addition of a guy like Phillip Rivers does for Nyheim Hines? Because we saw last year and in years past, running backs like Darren Sproles, Danny Woodhead, Austin Eckler last year had 90 catches. What do you think this does for the value of Nyheim Hines as the Colts' primary receiving running back?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Jonathan Taylor didn't do a whole lot of third down stuff at Wisconsin, frankly, because he needed a rest. But from a pass protection standpoint, from a pass catching standpoint, both of those things on third down, there's just not a lot of film of him doing that. So I think that he is someone that I'll be curious to see what that role is. But for now, I think Hines is still going to be your third down option, because he is built more in the mode of a Woodhead, of an Eckler, of a Sproles, of some scatter, back, jitterbug sort of guy, can move laterally well. And I think that part of his game is needed as well for this offense. It just gives you a different element. You can go with some 2-back sets, maybe use some wildcat stuff, use Hines and jet sweeps, things like that. I think he's a good chess piece that we saw late in the season, obviously explode on punt returns. But that is something that I think this offense should try and tap into. So, I know Marlon Mack has hardly been used on third down. Taylor, again, as a rookie, how much do you want to throw on his plate? I think you should make sure that Hines has some value for you, and again, can just diversify this offense with the skill set.
Yeah, and kind of want to talk about the last question I have here. So Frank Reich talked in his Zoom conference kind of about, Phillip Rivers and how the run game would help Phillip Rivers' game. I actually dug up some stats here from the 2018 Chargers when they went 12-4 to this last year when the Chargers had a losing record. In 2018, the Chargers were 18th in the league in rushing, and then a year later, they dropped 10 spots and are 28th, so near last in the league in rushing. Presumably, the Colts are going to have, they want a top 5 rushing attack. We'll just say, for the sake of argument, top 10 at least. How do you think that helps Phillip Rivers? Frank Reich has said we don't think he's lost anything physically, but he's 38, so he's getting up there in age. He's not, if he was mobile at all, he's definitely a statue now. How do you think that helps a guy like Phillip Rivers not having to feel like, kind of throwing it back to Andrew Luck, you have to, if I don't make this throw, my team may not win. How do you think this helps Phillip Rivers here, knowing he has a pretty good rushing attack behind him?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, something the Colts are banking on. That was part of this, get Rivers into a new environment. When a lot of people hear that, they think, okay, he is going to be what? Playing behind a better offensive line. But it's a lot more than that. To me, it's you have, again, like you said, the committed, productive rushing attack. And then you also should have a better defense, or at least an improved defense from where the Colts were last season. So if you're playing from ahead more, that should help you out. Rivers threw 20 interceptions last year. I want to say 17 of them, I think, were when they were tied or behind. So when you think about that, that's where it goes back to, okay, now you're playing from ahead. Rivers doesn't feel like he's got to play hero ball. He really struggled in the fourth quarter last year and having to come from behind in so many of those games. So I think those are all factors. I found it interesting. We talked to Frank Reich yesterday about his kind of virtual offseason program, and he mentioned that some of Rivers' best success was when they had a really productive run game. And, looking at the numbers closer, I didn't see like a direct correlation with that. So I just think it's almost an added bonus of like, if you can be a top 10 rushing attack, this is something that Phillip Rivers hasn't had. And I think a huge factor is going to be the play action game. We just didn't see enough of it last season. That's where the home run ability of a guy like Jonathan Taylor can come into play as well. You now strike some fear in opposing defense of like, oh, they got that guy. Oh, they got that guy. And that full well can lead to some plays over the top.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for your time, man. I know you just came off another podcast. I just actually saw it. You've yet to listen to it, but should be some good Colts conversations. And it's kind of going to be a little bit of a lull unless the Colts do something crazy. Besides the schedule release, there's really not a whole lot going on. I mean, everything big has kind of happened. So definitely we'll keep in touch. And I appreciate you coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Cody.